The phone rang at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I was staring at my Patek Philippe, counting the minutes until my next meeting with potential investors from Dubai. The sound cut through the silence of my office like a blade, and something in my chest tightened before I even answered. You know that feeling when your body knows something's wrong before your mind catches up? That's exactly what happened to me that Tuesday afternoon in my penthouse office overlooking the azure waters of Mykonos. Dimitrios Konstantinos Alexandros speaking, I said, using my full name the way I always did. It commanded respect. It reminded people exactly who they were dealing with. But the voice that came through the speaker made my blood freeze. It was young, female, and completely calm in a way that terrified me more than any shouting ever could. You meant you about everything. I know who you really are, and the world is going to know too. The line went dead. Just like that. No explanation, no demands, nothing. Just that promise hanging in the air like poison. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. Actually shaking. Do you know the last time my hands had shaken? Neither do I. I'm Dimitrios Alexandros. I own half of Mykonos. My family's name is carved into marble facades across 3 islands. I don't shake. I don't fear. I certainly don't. Let some girl with an accent I couldn't quite place make me question everything I've built. But there I was, standing in my office worth more than most people see in a lifetime, looking out at my private beach. My yacht anchored in crystal clear water, and feeling like everything was about to collapse. Because I knew exactly who that voice belonged to, even though I hadn't heard it in 3 years. Even though I'd paid good money to make sure I'd never hear it again. Evangelia, Eva, the girl from Amorgos, who was supposed to disappear after she gave me what I wanted. Let me take you back to how this all started, because you need to understand who I am to grasp how impossible this situation seemed. My name isn't just Dimitrios Alexandros, it's a legacy. My great-grandfather built the first luxury hotel in Mykonos in 1923. My grandfather expanded to Santorini and Crete. My father turned us into kings. By the time I inherited everything at 35, I owned 17 properties across the Greek islands, a private airline, and more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I lived alone in a mansion that used to belong to a shipping magnate, perched on the highest cliff in Mykonos, with 360-degree views of the Aegean Sea. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of waves crashing below and the scent of jasmine drifting through windows I kept open because I could afford to heat the Mediterranean breeze. My bedroom alone was larger than most people's entire homes. But here's what money can't buy you. Even when you have more of it than some small countries. A legacy that lasts. An heir. Someone to carry the Alexandros name forward. And at 42, I was running out of time. I tried marriage twice. Both women were from proper Greek families. Both beautiful. Both completely suitable on paper. But they wanted things I couldn't give them. Love, attention, emotional availability. What they didn't understand is that men like me aren't built for that kind of weakness. We're built to acquire, to possess, to control. Romance is for people who have time to waste. After my second divorce, I made a decision that seemed perfectly logical to me. Why complicate things with emotions when you can simply buy what you need? I needed an heir. Someone needed money. Simple transaction. That's when Thaddeus, my cousin and the only family I had left, suggested we look beyond Athens. Find someone from the islands, he said over drinks at my private club. Someone young, healthy, intelligent, enough to produce quality offspring, but poor enough to be grateful for the opportunity. The opportunity. That's how I thought about it. Like I was doing them a favor. I spent months researching, believe it or not, medical records, family histories, educational backgrounds. I approached this like any other business acquisition, because that's essentially what it was. I was acquiring the services of a womb temporarily, in exchange for enough money to change someone's life forever. And then I found her, Evangelia Papadimitriou, 19 years old, from the tiny island of Amor, daughter of a fisherman, honor student, working 3 jobs to save money for medical school. Perfect health, no family history of genetic disorders, and most importantly, desperately poor. I first saw her working at Costas Taverna during one of my rare visits to Amorgos for a property inspection. The island was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and she was serving tables while studying from a medical textbook during slow moments. She had this way of moving that was efficient but graceful, and when she smiled at customers, it was genuine. Not the practiced smile of someone working for tips, but real warmth. She was exactly what I was looking for. Young enough to be fertile, and compliant, smart enough to carry intelligent genes, poor enough to be motivated, and isolated enough that no one would ask too many questions. I made my move carefully. I started coming to the taverna regularly, always requesting her section, always tipping generously. I learned about her dreams of becoming a doctor, her sick mother who needed expensive treatment, her father who worked 16-hour days on his fishing boat just to keep food on the table. Education is so expensive these days, I mentioned during my 4th visit, watching her eyes light up when I asked about her studies. It's a shame that brilliant young people like you have to work so hard just for the opportunity to learn. That's when I planted the seed. Not the proposal itself, just the idea that I was someone who noticed her potential, someone who might be able to help. I let her come to me, in a way, made her comfortable with the idea that I was this benevolent, wealthy man who took interest in promising young people. It took 2 weeks of careful conversation before I made my offer. Not in the taverna, but during a private meeting I'd arranged under the pretense of discussing a scholarship program I was supposedly starting. "I have a proposition for you, Eva," I said, using her nickname the way her friends did, making myself seem approachable. "It's unconventional, but it could solve all your problems and give you the future you've been working so hard for. If you're watching this and thinking I was some kind of monster, let me stop you right there. What I offered Eva was a business arrangement that would benefit both of us. She would carry my child for 9 months, and in return, I would pay her enough money to attend any medical school in Europe, plus enough to ensure her family never worried about money again. We're talking about €500,000, life-changing money." The contract was clear, professional, and generous. She would receive the best medical care available, live in comfortable accommodations during the pregnancy, and walk away with enough wealth to transform not just her life, but her entire family's future. All she had to do was carry a baby for 9 months and then let me raise my heir the way I saw fit. "You'd be giving me a son or daughter," I explained to her in my most sincere voice. "And I'd be giving you everything you've ever dreamed of. It's not traditional, but the best opportunities rarely are." I watched her face as she processed the offer. I saw the conflict there. The way she looked out the window toward the small house where her sick mother was probably lying in bed, unable to afford the treatment that could save her life. I saw her touch the medical textbook she'd brought to our meeting, probably calculating how many years it would take her to save enough money for school while working 3 jobs. But I also saw something else in her eyes that I should have paid more attention to. Intelligence. Real intelligence. Not just book smarts. The kind of intelligence that analyzes and remembers and plans ahead. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course. But Eva, opportunities like this don't wait forever. I could find someone else, but I've chosen you because I believe you have the qualities I want my child to inherit. Your intelligence, your determination, your strength. It was manipulation, yes, but it was also true. She did have those qualities. That's exactly why I'd chosen her." 3 days later, she said yes. We signed the contract in my lawyer's office in Athens, with Thaddeus as witness. Eva read every page carefully, asked intelligent questions, and negotiated a few terms that honestly impressed me. She wasn't just signing blindly, she was making a calculated decision to trade 9 months of her life for a future she could never achieve otherwise. Or at least, that's what I thought was happening. That's what I believed right up until the moment 3 years later when my phone rang and her voice came through the speaker. Calm and deadly serious, promising to destroy everything I'd built. Because, as I stood there in my office that afternoon, watching the sun glint off the water and feeling my perfect life beginning to crack around the edges, I realized I might have completely misunderstood who Evangelia Papadimitriou really was. And if I was wrong about her, then everything that happened next was going to be very different from what I'd planned. The question that kept echoing in my mind as I stared out at my kingdom was simple but terrifying. What if the girl I thought I'd bought and controlled had been playing a game I didn't even know existed? The pregnancy test came back positive exactly 4 weeks after Eva signed our contract. I remember getting the call from the private clinic in Athens while I was reviewing architectural plans for a new resort in Crete. The doctor's voice was professional, almost clinical, as he confirmed what we'd all been working toward. "Congratulations, Mr. Alexandros. The procedure was successful. Ms. Papadimitriou is approximately 4 weeks pregnant." I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pure satisfaction. Not happiness, exactly, but the deep contentment that comes from a plan executed perfectly. Everything was proceeding exactly as I'd designed it. Eva would carry my heir, I would have the legacy I needed, and she would have enough money to transform her entire family's circumstances. Everyone would get what they wanted. That's what I told myself. Anyway, the first thing I did was arrange for Ava's transition from Avos to Athens. I couldn't have her continuing to work in that taverna, lifting heavy trays and being on her feet for 12 hours a day, not when she was carrying something so precious. I found her a beautiful apartment in Kolinaki, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, fully furnished with everything a pregnant woman could need. "You'll be more comfortable here," I explained as I showed her around the two-bedroom. Space with marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Acropolis. Close to the best doctors, the best hospitals, and you won't have to worry about work anymore. Your only job now is taking care of yourself and the baby. I'd thought she'd be grateful. The apartment was worth more per month than her family made in a year, but Eva stood at the window looking out at the city, and there was something in her posture that seemed almost resigned. "What about my mother?" she asked. I was sending money home for her treatments. "Already handled," I assured her. "I've arranged for your mother to receive the best care available in Athens. She'll be transferred to a private clinic next week, and all expenses are covered for the duration of your pregnancy and beyond." That was true. by the way. I'm not a complete monster, whatever you might think of me now. I kept every promise I made to Eva regarding her family's care. But looking back, I realize I never asked her if that's what she wanted. I just assumed that fixing her problems in the way I saw fit would make her grateful and compliant. I visited her weekly during those first few months, usually bringing some small gift or simply checking on how she was feeling. The doctor I'd selected for her care, Dr. Manolis Petros, was the best obstetrician in Greece, and he assured me that everything was progressing normally. Eva was healthy, the baby was developing perfectly, and there were no complications, but Eva herself seemed to be withdrawing more each time I saw her. During our first few meetings in Athens, she'd still ask questions about my plans for the child, about education and upbringing. She seemed genuinely interested in ensuring that her biological contribution would result in a good life for the baby. By month 4, those conversations had stopped entirely. She would answer my questions politely, accept whatever gifts or provisions I brought, and then retreat to her bedroom as soon as it was acceptable to do so. When I asked Dr. Petros about it, he suggested it might be normal pregnancy hormones or perhaps homesickness. Some women become more introspective during pregnancy, he explained. It's quite common, especially for someone so young and far from home. I accepted that explanation because it was convenient. Eva was serving her purpose, the pregnancy was progressing normally, and I had other business to attend to. I was negotiating the purchase of a private island near Santorini at the time, and that required most of my attention. It wasn't until month 5 that I began to understand something was seriously wrong. I'd arrived for my weekly visit to find Eva packing a small suitcase. She was moving slowly, her growing belly making even simple tasks more difficult, but she was definitely preparing to leave. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" I asked, and I heard the ice in my own voice. She looked up at me with those dark eyes that had seemed so warm and trusting back in Mykonos, but now held something I couldn't quite identify. "Home, I want to spend the rest of the pregnancy with. My family, that's not possible." "Why not?" "The contract doesn't say I have to stay in Athens. It just says I have to maintain proper medical care and follow the doctor's instructions." She was right, technically. The contract focused on health requirements and medical supervision, not geographic restrictions. But I'd never imagined she would want to leave the luxury I was providing to return to a tiny fishing village with limited medical facilities. "Eva, be reasonable. You have everything you could need here. The best doctors, the most comfortable living situation, complete financial security. Why would you want to go back to Amorgos, where your family is struggling and the medical care is basic at best?" That's when she said something that should have been a warning sign, but I was too focused on maintaining control to hear it properly. "Because here I feel like a prisoner in a golden cage." I laughed, actually laughed. "A prisoner? Eva, you're living in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Athens. You have unlimited access to medical care, shopping, entertainment. You have more freedom than most people dream of." "Do I? When was the last time I made a decision about my own life? When was the last time I went somewhere because I wanted to, not because you thought it was best for the baby?" The question caught me off guard because I couldn't answer it. Every aspect of Ava's life had been arranged by me, from her living situation to her medical care to her daily routine. I'd provided everything, but I'd never asked what she actually wanted. "This is temporary, Eva. 9 months, just like we agreed. And in return, you're receiving compensation that will change your entire family's life forever." I know what I signed, she said quietly. But knowing something intellectually and living it every day are different things. That's when I made my first real mistake, though I wouldn't understand it was a mistake until much later. Instead of listening to what Eva was trying to tell me, instead of recognizing that she was a human being with feelings and needs that went beyond financial compensation, I chose to see her resistance as a problem to be solved through better control. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, and I genuinely meant it. But I can't allow you to return to Mykonos. The medical facilities there aren't adequate for a pregnancy this important. And I won't risk complications because you're feeling homesick. You can't allow me. Her voice was very quiet. Eva, we have a contract. You accepted my offer because you wanted the financial security it provided. Part of that arrangement is ensuring the baby receives the best possible care, which means staying in Athens under Dr. Petros's supervision. What I didn't say, but what we both understood, was that I had the money and legal resources to make her life very difficult if she tried to break our agreement. The contract she'd signed was ironclad, drafted by the best lawyers in Greece, and heavily weighted in my favor. She unpacked her suitcase that day, but something fundamental changed. Between us, where there had been polite cooperation, now there was barely concealed resentment. Where there had been, at least surface-level, gratitude, now there was a kind of watchful silence that made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't quite articulate. I increased my visits to twice weekly, telling myself it was to ensure Ava's well-being, but knowing on some level that it was really to maintain control. I arranged for a housekeeper to check on her daily, ostensibly for her convenience, but actually to report back to me on her activities and mood. Dr. Petros continued to assure me that the pregnancy was progressing normally, but he also began mentioning Ava's emotional state more frequently. She seems isolated, he said during one of our private consultations. Perhaps you could arrange for her to have some social interaction, friends her own age, activities that interest her. But I was afraid that outside influences might give Eva ideas about changing our arrangement. What if she met someone who convinced her to break the contract? What if she developed relationships that made her less dependent on the financial security I was providing? So instead of expanding Ava's social circle, I restricted it further. I hired Penelope Varga, my longtime executive assistant, to coordinate Ava's care and serve as her primary contact for anything she needed. Penelope was efficient, discreet, and completely loyal to me. She would ensure Eva had everything necessary for a healthy pregnancy while maintaining the boundaries I required. Think of Penelope as your personal concierge, I explained to Eva. Anything you need, any questions you have, she'll handle it immediately. What I'd created, though I refused to acknowledge it at the time, was a system of benevolent imprisonment. Eva had every comfort money could buy, but no real freedom. She had excellent medical care, but no choice in her doctors. She had financial security, but no control over her own life. The worst part is that I convinced myself this was kindness. I was protecting her, providing for her, ensuring that my child had the best possible start in life. I never allowed myself to consider that what I was doing might be cruel, because that would have required admitting that Eva was more than just a vessel for my heir. It wasn't until month 7 that I realized Eva had been planning something the entire time, something that would force me to see her not as a possession or a service provider, but as a person with her own agenda, her own intelligence, and her own capacity for long-term strategic thinking. The signs were there, but I'd been so focused on maintaining control that I'd missed them entirely. The questions she'd stopped asking weren't because she'd lost interest, but because she'd learned everything she needed to know. The withdrawal I'd interpreted as pregnancy hormones was actually careful observation and planning. And the phone call I would receive 3 years later, the one that would shatter my perfect life into pieces, was already being prepared in the mind of a 19-year-old girl I'd underestimated so completely that I'd handed her every tool she would need to destroy me. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before Eva could reveal the true extent of her intelligence and planning, there was still the matter of birth, and the moment when I would finally get what I'd been working toward all along, only to discover that victory sometimes contains the seeds of total defeat. The labor started on a Thursday morning in late September. I remember because I was in a board meeting when Dr. Petros called to tell me Ava's contractions had begun and we needed to get to the hospital immediately. I'd been waiting for this call for weeks, had my driver on standby 24 hours a day, had everything planned down to the smallest detail. The drive to the private clinic felt like the longest 40 minutes of my life. Not because I was worried about Eva, exactly, but because I was so close to finally getting what I'd worked for. My heir, my legacy, the future of the Alexandra's name secured in one perfect moment. I found Eva in the maternity ward, already several hours into labor. She looked smaller than I remembered, somehow more fragile against the white hospital sheets. But when she saw me walk into the room, there was still that same watchful intelligence in her eyes that had been growing stronger. Throughout the pregnancy, "How are you feeling?" I asked, taking the chair beside her bed that the nurses had arranged for me. "Like I'm about to give you exactly what you paid for," she said. And there was something in her tone that I couldn't quite interpret. Not hostility, exactly, but not warmth, either. Dr. Petros appeared at my elbow with updates every hour. Everything was progressing normally, no complications. The baby's heartbeat was strong and steady. Eva was handling the labor well, better than most first-time mothers, according to the nursing staff. But as the hours passed, I began to notice something that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Eva kept asking about the baby in ways that suggested she was thinking beyond our contract. "Will you tell me what you name him?" she asked during a brief pause between contractions. "That's not really your concern," I replied as gently as I could. Our agreement was clear about the boundaries after birth. I know what the agreement says. I'm asking what you're planning to name your son. Your son, not the baby, not our child, but your son, as if she was already practicing the mental separation our contract required. "Alexandros," I told her. "Alexandros, Dimitrios. Konstantinos after my father and grandfather." She nodded, closed her eyes for a moment, then looked directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "He's going to be beautiful," she said, "and smart, and probably stubborn, like both of us." That should have been my warning. The way she said both of us, as if we were partners in something rather than parties to a business transaction. But I was so focused on the approaching finish line that I missed the significance entirely. The actual birth happened faster than anyone expected. One moment the nurses were telling us we had several more hours to go, and the next moment Dr. Petros was calling for everyone to prepare for delivery. Eva gripped the bed rails, her face flushed with effort and pain, and I found myself holding my breath as my son came into the world. Alexandros Dimitrios Konstantinos Alexandros was born at 11:37 p.m. on September 24th, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a full head of dark hair, and lungs that announced his arrival to the entire maternity ward. The moment Dr. Petros placed him in my arms, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not love, exactly, because I didn't really understand love in the way most people define it, but possession, certainly, and pride, and a fierce protectiveness that surprised me with its intensity. This was my son, my heir, the future of everything I'd built. I was so absorbed in studying Alexandros, counting his perfect features and marveling at how much he already looked like my father, that I almost missed what was happening with Eva. She was reaching for the baby with tears streaming down her face, making soft sounds I'd never heard from her before. When she saw me holding Alexandros, her expression changed to something desperate and pleading. "Please," she whispered. "Please let me hold him, just for a minute." I looked down at my son, then back at Eva, and felt the first stirring of what I now recognize was cruelty. Not intentional cruelty, you understand, but the kind of casual dismissal of someone else's feelings that comes naturally to people who've never had to consider anyone but themselves. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, quietly. "It'll just make this harder for you. Please, Dimitrios. I carried him for 9 months. I just want to hold him once." The desperation in her voice should have moved me. Any decent human being would have been touched by a mother's desire to hold her newborn child, even under our unusual circumstances. But I wasn't thinking of Eva as a mother. I was thinking of her as someone who'd provided a service and whose role was now complete. "Eva, we talked about this. Clean breaks are better for everyone involved. The longer you delay accepting reality, the more difficult this becomes." What I meant was that the longer she delayed letting go, the more likely she was to develop feelings. That might complicate our arrangement. I'd worked too hard and paid too much money to risk emotional complications at this late stage. Dr. Petros tried to intervene. "Mr. Alexandros, it's quite normal for mothers to want immediate contact with their newborns. Perhaps just a brief." "Dr. Petros," I said, in the voice I used to end conversations, "I believe Ms. Papadimitriou is tired and needs rest. Please, ensure she receives appropriate post-delivery care, and arrange for my son to be moved to the private nursery we discussed." I saw Ava's face crumble as the implications of my words hit her fully. Not just that she couldn't hold Alexandros now, but that I was already having him moved away from her entirely. "You can't," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "He's barely been born. I need to. Mothers are supposed to. You're not his mother, Eva. Not in any way that matters. You're the woman who carried him, and I'm grateful for that. But our contract was very clear about the boundaries here. Have you ever watched someone's heart break in real time? Because that's what I did that night. I watched a 19-year-old girl who just endured hours of labor to bring my child into the world realize that she would never be allowed to hold him, never be allowed to bond with him, never be allowed to be anything more than a biological footnote in his life. And instead of feeling sympathy or regret, I felt relief. The hardest part was over. Eva had fulfilled her obligation. Alexandros was healthy and perfect. And now I could move forward with raising my heir exactly as I'd planned. The nurses wheeled Alexandros away to the private nursery while Eva cried silently into her pillow. I followed them, wanting to ensure my son was receiving the best possible care, and I spent the rest of the night sitting beside his crib, making plans for his future. The next morning, I returned to Ava's room with the final payment we'd agreed. Upon 500,000 euros, transferred to an account in her name, plus an additional 50,000 as a bonus for what I considered exceptional service. "This is it," I said, placing the bank transfer documents on her bedside table. "Everything we agreed to, plus extra. You'll never have to worry about money again. Eva, you can attend any medical school in Europe. Your family will be comfortable for life. And you've given me the greatest gift imaginable." She was staring at the ceiling when I spoke, and she didn't look at me or the documents for a long moment. When she finally turned her head, her eyes were completely dry. But there was something in them that should have warned me I was missing something important. "Thank you," she said, in a voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear her. "You're welcome. And Eva, I want you to know that I'll make sure Alexandros grows up knowing that his biological mother was an intelligent, strong woman who made a difficult decision to give him the best possible life." That was a lie, by the way. I had no intention of telling Alexandros anything about Eva beyond the basic medical facts I might need for his health records. But it seemed like the kind of thing she'd want to hear. "Will you send me pictures sometimes?" she asked. "Just so I know he's healthy and happy." "I don't think that would be wise. Clean breaks, remember. It's better for everyone if you focus on building your new life rather than looking backward." She nodded, still not reaching for the payment documents, still staring at me with that unreadable expression. "I understand," she said finally. 2 days later, Eva was discharged from the hospital. I'd arranged for a car to take her wherever she wanted to go, and I assumed she'd return to Amorgos to see her family before starting her new life in Athens or wherever she chose to attend medical school. I didn't see her leave. I was too busy with Alexandros, arranging his transition to the mansion in Mykonos, hiring the best nannies money could buy, setting up the nursery I'd had designed months earlier. Everything was perfect, exactly as I'd envisioned it. It wasn't until a week later that I realized Eva had never deposited the money I'd given her. The account remained untouched, the transfers unclaimed. When I called the number I had for her, it was disconnected. When I sent Penelope to check the apartment in Athens, it was empty except for the furniture I'd provided. Evangelia Papagimit had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. No forwarding address, no contact information, no trace of where she'd gone or what she was planning. I should have been concerned. A reasonable person would have wondered why someone would walk away from €500,000 without explanation. But I wasn't reasonable, and I certainly wasn't worried about Eva. I was too busy enjoying my victory. I had my son, my heir, my legacy secured. Whatever Eva was doing or wherever she'd gone was no longer my problem. She'd served her purpose, and now I could focus on what really mattered: raising Alexandros to take his place as the next generation of the Alexandros dynasty. For 3 years, I lived in that perfect bubble of satisfaction and control. 3 years of watching my son grow, of teaching him to swim in our private pool, of showing him the properties that would one day be his, of planning the education that would prepare him to lead our empire. 3 beautiful, peaceful, completely deluded years before Ava's phone call shattered everything and forced me to realize that disappearing hadn't meant giving up. It had meant preparing for war. Those 3 years after Eva disappeared were the best years of my life. I know that might sound strange considering what happened later, but you have to understand how perfect everything seemed from my perspective. I had my son, I had my empire, and I had complete control over both. Every morning, I'd wake up in my mansion overlooking the Aegean, check on Alexandros in his nursery, and feel this deep satisfaction that everything had worked out exactly as I'd planned. Alexandros was extraordinary from the very beginning. By 6 months, he was already showing signs of advanced intelligence, tracking objects with his eyes in ways that impressed even the pediatric specialists I'd hired to monitor his development. By his first birthday, he was walking steadily and beginning to form words. Not just simple sounds, but actual recognizable speech that made the nannies marvel at his precociousness. I spared no expense in his care, obviously. The best organic food flown in from specialty farms across Europe, clothes made by artisans in Italy, toys designed by child development experts to stimulate cognitive growth. His nursery was a masterpiece of modern design and educational functionality, with custom-built furniture and a sound system that played classical music specifically chosen to enhance brain development. But more than the material things, I was determined to be present in his life in ways my own father never was with me. I reduced my business travel, delegated more responsibilities to my executives, and structured my days around Alexandros' schedule. Bath time, story time, teaching him to swim in our private pool, walking with him through the gardens while explaining the names of flowers and birds. Have you ever felt like you were living your life exactly as it was meant to be lived? Because that's how those years felt to me. I was building something greater than just a business empire. I was creating a dynasty. And every day with Alexandros was another step toward ensuring the Alexandros name would continue for generations. The staff I'd hired to help care for him were all carefully chosen professionals.
Some hearts move slow like rivers through the night, but mine found you and everything felt right. I tried to wait, I tried to stay away, but love like this, it doesn't ask, it stays. And every time you breathe I hear a song, a quiet pool that's been here all along. I'm falling into you, like stars into the sky, like ocean waves.
Maria Costas, his primary nanny, had 30 years of experience with wealthy families and came with impeccable references. Dr. Alina Vassiliou was a pediatrician who specialized in early childhood development and made house calls twice monthly to ensure Alexandros was meeting every milestone. And Sofia Drakos, his early education specialist, designed custom learning programs that would prepare him for the elite schools. I was already researching. Everything was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Until it wasn't. The first sign that something might be wrong came when Alexandros was about 2.5 years old. He'd been sleeping through the night consistently for over a year, but suddenly he started waking up crying, sometimes screaming in the middle of the night. Not the normal crying of a toddler having a bad dream, but these heart-wrenching sobs that would go on for hours. Maria would try to comfort him. I would try to comfort him, but nothing seemed to help. He would just cry and cry, reaching for something we couldn't see, calling out words we couldn't understand. Dr. Vassiliou suggested it might be night terrors, which are apparently common in children that age, especially those with active imaginations and high intelligence. She recommended maintaining consistent bedtime routines and perhaps reducing his exposure to stimulating activities before sleep. But the crying episodes continued, and they began to follow a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Alexandros would wake up asking for mama, reaching his little arms toward the doorway as if he expected someone to walk through it. When Maria or I would come to comfort him, he'd look disappointed, like we weren't who he was hoping to see. He's never had a mother figure, Dr. Vassiliou explained during one of our consultations. It's possible he's developing an instinctual longing for that type of bond, even though he's never experienced it directly. That explanation made sense to me, intellectually, but it also irritated me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. I was providing Alexandros with everything he could possibly need: love, attention, education, security, opportunities that most children could never dream of. Why wasn't that enough? Why was he crying for someone who'd never been part of his life? I decided the solution was to provide him with more positive male role models and activities that would reinforce our father-son bond. I started taking him sailing on my yacht, teaching him about the family business, showing him the properties that would one day be his inheritance. When he was old enough, I enrolled him in music lessons, language tutoring, and swimming instruction, with Olympic-level coaches. For a while, this approach seemed to work. The nighttime crying episodes decreased, and Alexandros appeared to be thriving during the day. He was bright, curious, physically active, and socially engaging with the adults in his life. Everything a father could want in a son. But then he started asking questions that made me deeply uncomfortable. "Papa, where is my mama?" he asked one afternoon when he was 3 years old. We were sitting by the pool, and he was playing with some toy boats while I worked on my laptop. "You don't have a mama, Alexandros. You have Papa, and that's all you need. But all the other children have mamas. Why don't I?" I'd prepared for this conversation, obviously. I'd consulted with child psychologists about the best way to handle questions about his origins without getting into details that were inappropriate for his age. "Some families are different," I explained. "Some children have a mama and papa. Some have just a mama. Some have just a papa. Our family is Papa and Alexandros, and that makes us special." He seemed to accept this explanation, but over the following weeks, the questions continued and became more specific. What did my mama look like? Was my mama nice? Why did my mama go away? Each question felt like a small attack on the perfect life I'd created for us. I'd gone to enormous expense and effort to ensure Alexandros would never need anything or anyone beyond what I could provide. And yet he kept asking for the one thing I couldn't give him: a connection to Eva. The situation became truly problematic. When Alexandros started getting sick more frequently than seemed normal for a healthy 3-year-old. Nothing serious, just recurring respiratory infections, digestive issues, and fatigue that didn't seem to respond to standard treatments. Dr. Vassilou recommended we consult with a pediatric specialist in Athens who could run more comprehensive tests. That's when I encountered the first real consequence of having completely cut Eva out of our lives. I need the mother's complete medical history. Dr. Andreas Stavros explained during our consultation at the Children's Hospital in Athens. Family history of allergies, autoimmune conditions, genetic predispositions, any medications she took during pregnancy, her nutritional status, environmental factors during gestation. Without that information, I'm working blind trying to understand why Alexandros is having these recurring health issues. I felt my chest tighten as I realized I had almost none of the information he needed. I knew Ava's basic health status from the prenatal screenings I'd required, but I'd never bothered to collect detailed family medical histories or information about her own childhood health patterns. The biological mother is no longer available for consultation, I said carefully. Dr. Stavros looked surprised. Not available. "Mr. Alexandros, we're talking about your son's health. Surely the mother would want to provide information that could help her child. It's a complicated situation. Mr. Alexandros, I've been treating children for 25 years, and I've seen every kind of family situation imaginable. Whatever the complications, your son's health should be the priority for everyone involved. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and feeling something I hadn't experienced since I was a child. Genuine fear. Not fear of business failure or financial loss, things I knew how to handle, but fear that I might not be able to protect Alexandros from problems I didn't understand and couldn't control. For the first time since Eva had signed our contract, I found myself wishing I'd handled her departure differently, not because I missed her or regretted our arrangement, but because I was realizing that cutting her off completely might have been a strategic error. The next morning, I instructed Penelope to begin trying to locate Eva. Quietly, discreetly, just enough to establish contact if we needed medical information for Alexandros. I assumed it would be simple. How far could a 19-year-old girl from Mykonos have gone with no money and no connections? But Eva had vanished more completely than seemed possible. Penelope contacted private investigators, searched social media, checked university enrollment records across Europe, even had someone visit her family's home in Mykonos. Nothing, no trace of Evangelia Papadimitriou anywhere. It's like she deliberately disappeared, Penelope reported after weeks of searching. No digital footprint, no financial transactions, no official records since she left the hospital. Either she's using a completely different identity, or she's living completely off the grid. This information should have concerned me more than it did. A reasonable person would have wondered why someone would go to such lengths to erase their existence unless they were planning something. But I was still thinking of Eva as that desperate 19-year-old who'd needed money for her mother's medical care. I couldn't imagine her having the resources or sophistication to reinvent herself so completely. Meanwhile, Alexandros' health issues continued, and his questions about his mother became more frequent and more sophisticated. By his 4th birthday, he'd stopped accepting simple answers about our family structure and started asking things like, "Why won't you tell me about my mama? And did my mama not want me?" Those questions hit me harder than I expected because they suggested that my son was beginning to see my refusal to discuss Eva as deliberate concealment rather than protection. And maybe, for the first time, I was beginning to question whether my approach had been the right one. Don't misunderstand me. I still believed I'd done what was best for everyone involved. Eva had received life-changing compensation for 9 months of pregnancy. I had the heir I needed, and Alexandros was growing up with every advantage money could provide. But watching my son struggle with questions I couldn't answer and health issues I couldn't solve was forcing me to confront the possibility that some problems couldn't be fixed with money and control. The breaking point came just after Alexandros turned 4. He developed a severe allergic reaction to something we couldn't identify, ending up in the emergency room with breathing difficulties and a rash covering most of his body. The doctors were able to stabilize him, but they were adamant that without knowing his complete genetic and medical history, future episodes could be life-threatening. "Mr. Alexandros," Dr. Stavros said as we stood outside Alexandros' hospital room, "I'm going to be very direct with you. Your son needs his mother's medical information, not just for this incident, but for his ongoing health and development. Whatever personal or legal complications exist between you and his mother, they're secondary to his well-being." That night, as I sat beside Alexandros' hospital bed, watching him sleep with oxygen tubes in his nose, I made a decision that I thought was purely practical. I would find Eva, get the medical information I needed, and then return to our separate lives with clear boundaries. I hired the best private investigation firm in Europe, gave them unlimited resources, and told them to find Evangelia no matter what it took or how long it required. What I didn't anticipate was that finding Eva would be the easy part. The hard part would be discovering that the 19-year-old girl I'd thought I'd controlled and dismissed had spent the last 4 years becoming someone I never could have imagined. Someone with resources, education, connections, and a plan. That had been years in the making. Someone who'd been waiting for exactly the right moment to call me and say the words that would destroy everything I'd built. You lied about everything. I know who you really are, and the world is going to know too. The private investigators found Eva 3 weeks after I hired them. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing Alexandros' latest test results with Dr. Stavros, still trying to piece together the medical puzzle of my son's health issues without the information only his biological mother could provide. We located Evangelia Papadimitriou, the lead investigator. Mr. Kostas Milanos said when I answered his call, "But Mr. Alexandros, there are some things about her current situation that you need to know before we proceed. Just tell me where she is so I can contact her about Alexandros' medical needs." "She's in Athens. She's been there for the past 2 years, apparently. But sir, she's not the same person you remember. She's completed law school at the University of Athens, graduated summa cum laude, and she's currently working for one of the most prestigious human rights law firms in the country." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Law school, full scholarship, accelerated program. She completed her degree in 3 years instead of the usual 4. Her specialty appears to be reproductive rights and contracts involving vulnerable populations. The words hit me like physical blows. Eva hadn't just disappeared to build a quiet new life somewhere far away. She'd spent 4 years transforming herself into exactly the kind of person who could challenge everything I'd done. There's more, sir. She's been featured in several legal journals for her work on cases involving surrogacy, exploitation, and coercive reproductive agreements. She's developed something of a reputation as an advocate for women who've been taken advantage of by wealthy men seeking to circumvent traditional adoption and family law. My hands were shaking again, just like they had the day she called. Have you ever felt the ground shifting beneath your feet? Not literally, but emotionally. That's what was happening to me as I realized that every assumption I'd made about Eva, every comfortable rationalization I'd constructed about our arrangement, was built on a foundation that was about to crumble completely. "Give me her contact information," I managed to say. "Mr. Alexandros, based on our research into her current activities, I would strongly recommend having your own attorney present before any communication occurs." But I wasn't thinking about attorneys or legal protection. I was thinking about Alex lying in that hospital bed, needing medical information that only Eva could provide. Whatever complicated feelings existed between us, surely she would want to help her biological child. I called the number Mr. Milanos provided that same afternoon. Eva answered on the second ring, and her voice was exactly the same as it had been in that terrifying phone call weeks earlier, calm, controlled, and completely confident. "Hello, Dimitrios. I was wondering when you'd finally track me down. Eva, I need to talk to you about Alexandros. He's been having health issues, and the doctors need your family medical history. Is that the only reason you're calling? Medical information?" "Yes. Look, whatever happened between us, whatever you think about our arrangement, Alexandros is an innocent child who needs help. Can we meet somewhere to discuss his health needs?" There was a long pause, And when Eva spoke again, her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Of course, let's meet. I think it's time we had a comprehensive conversation about Alexandros and everything else. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I know a lovely cafe in Kolonaki, not far from the apartment, where you kept me isolated for 5 months. The way she said kept me isolated sent another chill through me, but I agreed to meet her. I told myself this was just about getting medical information for my son. I had no idea I was walking into an ambush for years in the making. The cafe she'd chosen was small, intimate, with outdoor seating that provided privacy for serious conversations. I arrived first, ordering coffee and trying to prepare mentally for what I expected would be an emotional but straightforward discussion about Alexandros' health needs. Eva walked in exactly on time, and I barely recognized her. The nervous 19-year-old from Emorgos had been replaced by a confident woman in an expensive suit, carrying herself with the kind of professional authority that comes from education and success. Her hair was shorter, styled in a way that emphasized her intelligence rather than her youth, and when she looked at me, there was no trace of the deference or gratitude I remembered. "You look well," I said as she sat down across from me. "I am well, very well, actually. Law school was challenging, but rewarding. I specialized in reproductive rights, as I'm sure your investigators told you." She knew I'd hired investigators. Of course she knew. This woman wasn't leaving anything to chance. "Eva, about Alexandros' medical situation, ... Before we discuss that, she interrupted. "There are some things you need to understand about our previous arrangement and its legal implications." She opened a leather portfolio and removed a stack of documents that she placed on the table between us. "What is this?" "Evidence. 4 years worth of careful documentation about what really happened between us. Starting from our first conversation in that taverna in Amor." My throat felt dry. "What kind of evidence?" "Recordings, for one thing. Did you know that Greek law allows single-party consent for audio recordings when documenting potential criminal activity? I started recording our conversations after our second meeting, when it became clear that what you were proposing wasn't the benevolent arrangement you pretended it was." She tapped a small device I hadn't noticed her carrying. "Everything, Dimitrios. Your explanations of how you'd isolated me from my family, your casual dismissal of my emotional needs, your threats about what would happen if I tried to break our contract. All of it recorded and legally admissible." I felt like I was falling, even though I was sitting perfectly still. "Eva, whatever you think happened, our contract was completely legal. You signed it willingly, did I? Let's listen to what you said. When I tried to negotiate better terms, shall we?" She pressed play on the device, and my own voice filled the space between us, confident and dismissive in a way that made me cringe to hear it now. "Eva, you need to understand your position here. Your mother needs surgery that costs more than your family will earn in their entire lifetimes. Your father's fishing boat is about to be repossessed. You can accept my generous offer and solve all these problems, or you can refuse and watch your family lose everything they have. Those are your only options." I don't remember saying that, really, because I remember it very clearly. I also remember you explaining how easy it would be to destroy my family's reputation on Amorgos if I caused any trouble, and how no legitimate adoption agency would ever work with a poor fishing family when there were wealthy couples available. Each revelation was like a physical blow. I had said those things, but I'd convinced myself they were just practical explanations of reality, not threats or coercion. But the evidence gets much more interesting, Eva continued, removing another set of documents from her portfolio. Because, while you were so focused on controlling every aspect of my pregnancy and ensuring I couldn't interfere with your perfect plan, you never bothered to verify some basic facts. What facts? DNA facts. She placed a laboratory report on the table, and I saw my name at the top, next to Alexandra's, with results that made my vision blur around the edges. That's impossible. 0% probability of paternity. You are not Alexandra's biological father, Demetrios. You never were. The world seemed to tilt sideways. That's impossible. You were a virgin when the medical examinations confirmed, ... I was never a virgin. I had a boyfriend, Nikos Andropoulos, who died in a fishing accident 2 weeks before you made your offer. I was already 6 weeks pregnant when I signed your contract. My mouth was moving, but no words were coming out. Eva continued speaking, in that same calm, professional tone, like she was presenting a case to a judge rather than destroying everything I'd believed about my life. I needed money for my mother's surgery, just like I told you. But I also needed a father for my baby, because Nikos was dead and I had no other options. When you approached me with your proposition, it seemed like a perfect solution. You wanted a child. I needed financial security. The only problem was that you were so arrogant, so convinced of your own superiority, that you never bothered to question whether the child I was carrying was actually yours. But the timing, the medical records. I lied about my last menstrual period during the initial consultation. Simple misdirection that your expensive doctors never questioned because you'd already told them what you expected to hear. If you've ever had the experience of discovering that your entire understanding of reality was built on lies, you know what I was feeling in that moment. Everything I'd believed about Alexandros, about Eva, about my own cleverness and control, was collapsing like a house of cards. So whose child is he? Mine and Nikos's. A fishing family from Emorgos. Exactly the kind of people you look down on as inferior. The son you've been so proud of, the heir you've been training to carry on your precious family legacy, has absolutely no connection to you beyond the fact that you paid me to pretend he did. I stared at the DNA results, reading them over and over as if the numbers might change if I looked long enough. But the science was clear, undeniable, devastating. Why? I finally managed to ask. Why tell me this now? Because Alexandros is getting older, and he's starting to ask questions about his mother that you can't answer. Because he's been having health issues that require real family medical history, not the fantasy you've constructed. And because I've spent 4 years building a case that will expose exactly what you did to me and ensure it never happens to anyone else. She placed one final document on the table. A legal filing with the Athens family court, requesting full custody of Alexandros and charging me with fraud, coercion, and illegal surrogacy arrangements. I'm taking my son home, Demetrios, and I'm making sure the whole world understands exactly what kind of man you really are. The cafes seemed to be spinning round me. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I'd believed about myself and my future was dissolving before my eyes. You can't do this. I've raised him for 4 years. He's my son in every way that matters. Is he? Because from what I can tell, you've treated him exactly the way you treated me, as a possession to be controlled rather than a person to be loved. She stood up, gathering her documents with the efficiency of someone who'd planned every detail of this confrontation. You'll be hearing from my attorney within the week, and Demetrius, That phone call I made to you last month, that was just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, everyone will know exactly what you did, and no amount of money or family reputation will protect you from the consequences." As I watched her walk away, confident and purposeful in a way that reminded me of myself in my best moments, I realized that the girl I'd thought I'd bought and controlled had actually been playing a game I never even knew existed. And I had just lost everything. The legal papers arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered by a courier to my office while I was trying to pretend that normal business could continue. Thaddeus was with me when Penelope brought them in, and I watched his face change as he read through Ava's comprehensive legal filing. My cousin had been my accomplice in this arrangement from the beginning, but he'd also been my closest advisor, and I could see him calculating the devastating implications of what Eva had assembled against us. "Demetrios," he said quietly, setting the papers down on my desk. "This is catastrophic. She has recordings, medical records, financial documentation, witness statements from hospital staff. She's even tracked down the original investigator you hired to research her family background, and he's provided testimony about the surveillance you conducted. It can't be that bad. Our contract was legal." No, it wasn't. Not if she can prove coercion, which she clearly can. "And the DNA evidence, ... double quotes, he trailed off, shaking his head. "How did you never verify paternity? How did you spend 4 years raising someone else's child without ever questioning it?" That was the question that had been eating at me since Ava's revelation. How had I been so arrogant, so completely convinced of my own control over the situation, that I'd never once thought to confirm that Alexandros was actually mine? The answer was humbling and devastating, because I'd never seen Eva as anything more than a vessel, because I'd been so focused on getting what I wanted that I'd never considered she might have her own agenda. "What do her lawyers want?" I asked. "Everything. Full custody of Alexandros, obviously. Complete financial disclosure of your assets, because they're claiming you used your wealth to coerce and control her. And they want damages. Not just the money you originally paid her, but compensation for 4 years of separation from her child. For the emotional trauma you caused, for the ongoing therapy both she and Alexandros will need. Therapy, Demetrios. You separated a mother from her newborn child and then kept them apart for 4 years. Do you have any idea what that does to people, what it's probably already done to Alex? I thought about my son's nighttime crying, his constant questions about his mother, his recent health issues that might have been psychosomatic responses to stress and confusion he couldn't articulate. Had I damaged him in ways I was only beginning to understand? But more immediately, Thaddeus continued, "They're asking for an emergency custody hearing. They want Alexandros removed from your care within 72 hours pending the full investigation." The room felt like it was closing in around me. "They can't take him away immediately. I'm the only father he's ever known. You're not his father at all. And Eva has 4 years of documentation proving that your care has been harmful to his development. Medical records showing unexplained illnesses, testimony from school officials about his emotional instability, recordings of you explicitly stating that you view him as property rather than a person." That afternoon, I drove to the mansion in a state of panic I hadn't experienced since childhood. How do you explain to a 4-year-old boy that everything he knows about his life is about to change? How do you tell him that the woman he's been asking about for years is coming to take him away from the only home he's ever known? I found Alexander in the garden with Maria, building something elaborate with his toy blocks while she watched from a nearby bench. He looked up when he saw me approaching, and his face lit up with the kind of pure joy that children reserve for their favorite people. "Papa, look what I made. It's a castle like ours, but with a special room for when my mama comes to visit." The innocence in his voice hit me like a physical blow. Even at 4 years old, even after all my efforts to make him forget about Eva, he was still hoping for her return. Had I been fighting a losing battle all along? "Alexandros, we need to talk about something important." He must have heard something serious in my tone because he stopped playing and gave me his full attention. Sitting cross-legged on the grass with those dark eyes that looked so much like Ava's, focused entirely on my face. "Do you remember how? You've been asking about your mama." "Yes. Is she coming to visit? Is that why you look sad?" Yes, she's coming. But Alexandros, there are some things about our family that I haven't told you, and I need you to understand that everything I did was because I love you and wanted to give you the best life possible." How do you explain to a child that you've been lying to them about the most fundamental aspects of their existence? How do you admit that you've kept them away from their real parent for selfish reasons they're too young to understand? I ended up telling him a simplified version of the truth, that his mama had been away for a long time but was coming back, that she loved him very much and wanted to take care of him, and that there might be some changes in where he lived and who he lived with. I watched his face process this information, saw the mixture of excitement and confusion and fear that played across his features. "Will I still see you, Papa?" That question broke something fundamental inside me, because the honest answer was that I didn't know. Ava's legal filing made it clear that she wanted complete custody, and given what I'd done, given the evidence she'd assembled against me, I might lose access to Alexandros entirely. "I don't know, son. But no matter what happens, I want you to remember that these 4 years we've had together have been the best years of my life. And wherever you go, whatever happens, you'll always be special to me." He threw his small arms around my neck then, and I held him tight, breathing in the scent of his hair and memorizing the weight of his body against mine, because I knew this might be one of the last times he'd want to hug me. The custody hearing happened faster than I'd expected. Ava's lawyers had convinced the judge that Alexandros was in immediate psychological danger due to my continued deception about his origins and his mother's absence. Within a week, I was sitting in an Athens courthouse watching a parade of witnesses describe my actions in terms that made me sound like a monster. Dr. Stavros testified about Alexandros's unexplained health issues and my refusal to provide adequate medical history. Maria, my own employee, testified about his nighttime crying and constant questions about his mother. Even Penelope, who'd been loyal to me for 15 years, acknowledged under oath that she'd witnessed me deliberately isolating Eva during her pregnancy and dismissing her emotional needs. But the most devastating testimony came from Eva herself. She spoke calmly and professionally about our original arrangement, playing selected recordings that made my manipulation and threats crystal clear. She explained how I'd isolated her from her family, controlled every aspect of her life during pregnancy, and then traumatized her by refusing to let her hold her newborn child. Mr. Alexandros treated both me and my son as objects to be acquired and controlled, she told the judge. He never saw us as human beings with rights and feelings. He separated me from my child through fraud and coercion, and he's continued that pattern of control and deception with Alexandros for 4 years. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to explain that everything I'd done was motivated by love for Alexandros and a desire to give him the best possible life. But my own recorded words contradicted every claim I made. about benevolent intentions. The judge's decision was swift and unambiguous. Temporary custody was awarded to Eva immediately, with supervised visitation rights for me, pending the outcome of the full investigation. Alexandros would be transitioned to his mother's care gradually over the following week to minimize trauma. I'll never forget the moment when Eva walked into the courthouse waiting area where Alexandros was sitting with a social worker. He looked up and saw her, and something in his face changed completely. Not recognition, exactly, because he'd never really known her, but something deeper. Some instinctual connection that for years of separation hadn't been able to erase. "Are you my mama?" he asked in that serious way 4-year-olds have of approaching life-changing moments. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your mama, and I've been waiting to meet you for a very long time." He walked over to her cautiously, and she knelt down to his level, letting him approach at his own pace. When he finally let her hug him, I saw Ava's face crumble with 4 years of suppressed emotion and grief. "I'm sorry I was away for so long," she whispered to him, "but I'm here now, and I'm never going to leave you again." Watching them together, seeing how naturally Alexandros relaxed into her embrace, I finally understood what I'd stolen from both of them. Not just time, but the fundamental bond between a mother and child that I'd convinced myself was disposable. The media attention that followed was exactly as devastating as Eva had promised. Her lawyers released carefully selected portions of our story to journalists who specialized in exposing wealthy men who exploited vulnerable women. Within days, my name was associated with terms like reproductive coercion, modern slavery, and billionaire redditor. The business empire my family had built over generations began collapsing almost immediately. Partners withdrew from deals. Investors pulled their money, and several of my luxury properties were boycotted by guests who didn't want to be associated with my reputation. The private airline lost its operating license after regulators found reasons to scrutinize every aspect of our operations. But the personal cost was even higher than the financial devastation. I'd lost Alexandros, the son I'd loved even though he wasn't biologically mine. I'd lost my reputation, the respect that had been the foundation of my identity. And I'd lost any illusion I'd maintained about being a good person who'd simply made some questionable choices. The final legal settlement, reached 8 months after Ava's initial filing, was comprehensive and humiliating. I was required to pay damages totaling €12 million, establish a fund for other women who'd been victims of similar arrangements, and submit to ongoing psychological evaluation as a condition of maintaining even limited visitation rights with Alexandros. More importantly, Eva gained everything she'd fought for: full custody of our son, legal acknowledgement that she'd been coerced into our original arrangement, and the resources to build a new life where she could be the mother she'd always wanted to be. I see them sometimes, Eva and Alexandros, walking together near the harbor in Athens, where she's established her law practice. He's grown taller, looks healthier, and has the kind of easy confidence that comes from feeling loved and secure. They hold hands when they walk, and he chatters constantly, the way children do when they feel safe enough to share everything there. Thinking Eva has become exactly what I should have recognized she could be from the beginning. A brilliant, strong woman who refuses to let anyone diminish her worth or potential. Her law firm specializes in cases like ours, representing women who've been exploited by wealthy men, who think money gives them the right to control other people's lives and bodies. As for me, I live alone now in a much smaller house, spending My days trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could convince himself that love and control were the same thing. The mandatory therapy has forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my character, my values, and the way I've treated people throughout my life. I still love Alexandros, even though I see him only once a month under supervised conditions. But I'm learning to love him in a way that prioritizes his well-being over my own desires, that respects his need for his mother, that acknowledges the damage I caused by trying to erase her from his life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd approached Eva differently from the beginning, if I'd offered to help with her mother's medical care without demanding anything in return, if I'd recognized her intelligence and potential instead of seeing her as someone to be manipulated, if I'd understood that the best things in life can't be bought or controlled, only earned through genuine respect and care. But those are questions I'll spend the rest of my life contemplating, because the choices I made, the harm I caused, and the people I hurt can never be undone. The girl from Amor Goes, who I thought I could buy and discard, taught me the most expensive lesson of my life. That true power comes not from wealth or control, but from the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. Eva destroyed my empire not through violence or revenge, but through the simple act of refusing to let me pretend that what I'd done was acceptable. She proved that no amount of money or family reputation can protect someone from the consequences of their actions forever. And she showed me that the people we think are powerless often have more strength than those of us who mistake privilege for superiority. I thought I was a god among mortals, dispensing opportunities and controlling destinies. But I was just a man who confused wealth with wisdom, control with love, and power with worth. And in the end, the truth Eva revealed about who I really was proved far more powerful than any lie I'd tried to construct about who I wanted to be.
No reason fights the truth, no fear can break it through, 'cause I was made for